The dust had worked its way so deep into Rebecca Johnson's bones that she sometimes wondered if she would ever feel clean again. But it was the exhaustion that truly haunted her, the kind that made every step feel like wading through thick mud as she stumbled into the small mining town of Murphy's, California, on a scorching afternoon in July of 1873. Her boots were held together more by determination than leather at this point, and the simple cotton dress she wore had been mended so many times that the original fabric was hard to distinguish from the patches. Rebecca had been traveling for over a year, sleeping on hard ground, rocky outcroppings, and occasionally in barns when some kind soul took pity on her. She had left her home in Missouri after her father died, and the bank took everything, leaving her with nothing but the clothes on her back and a burning need to find her uncle in San Francisco. The problem was that she had run out of money 3 months ago in the Sierra Nevada foothills, and Murphy's was as far as she could manage to walk. The town was bustling despite the heat. Gold mining had made Murphy's prosperous, though the wild rush of earlier decades had settled into a more established rhythm. Buildings lined both sides of the main street, some painted, some bare wood weathered gray by the mountain sun. Rebecca could see a general store, a saloon, a hotel, and various other establishments that suggested this was a town with staying power. Her stomach growled painfully. She had eaten the last of her meager provisions 2 days ago, and the only water she had found was from a creek that morning. Rebecca knew she looked terrible. She could feel how hollow her cheeks had become, how her dress hung loosely on a frame that had once been healthily curved. Her dark brown hair, which she had always kept neat despite her circumstances, was now tangled and dulled by dust. She needed work. Any work. And she needed it immediately. The hotel seemed like a logical place to start. Perhaps they needed someone to clean rooms or help in the kitchen. Rebecca pushed open the door, grateful for the shade inside, and approached the front desk where a thin woman with graying hair looked up from a ledger. "Help you?" the woman asked, her eyes taking in Rebecca's appearance with a mixture of pity and wariness. "I am looking for work," Rebecca said, trying to keep her voice steady and professional despite how desperately hungry she was. "I can clean, cook, mend clothes, help with accounts, whatever you might need." The woman's expression softened slightly. "I am sorry, dear. We are fully staffed right now, have been for months. You might try the saloon, but—" She trailed off, and Rebecca understood the implication. She was not that desperate. Not yet. "Thank you anyway," Rebecca said quietly, turning toward the door. "Wait," the woman called. "The seer." Rebecca turned back, hope flaring painfully in her chest. "There is a rancher who comes through town regularly, Samuel Vance. He has a spread about 5 miles north of here. I heard him mention last week that he was looking for someone to help with cooking and general housekeeping. His previous housekeeper married and moved to Sacramento. You might ride out there and ask." "I do not have a horse," Rebecca admitted. "He is in town today. Saw him heading to the general store about 20 minutes ago. Tall fellow, dark hair, usually wears a brown hat with a silver band. If you hurry, you might catch him before he heads back." Rebecca thanked the woman profusely and hurried back out into the blazing sunlight. The general store was only a short walk down the street, but even that small distance made her head swim. She needed to eat soon, or she would collapse. The general store was crowded with customers, and Rebecca stood just inside the entrance, scanning the room for someone matching the description. There near the back, examining a length of rope, stood a man who had to be Samuel Vance. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that spoke of hard physical work. His dark brown hair was slightly too long, curling at the nape of his neck beneath the brown hat the hotel clerk had mentioned. Even from across the room, Rebecca could see he was probably in his mid-20s, with a strong jaw shadowed by stubble and an air of quiet competence. She forced her tired legs to carry her across the store. As she approached, he looked up, and she found herself meeting eyes so blue they reminded her of the summer sky over Missouri. For a moment she forgot what she was going to say. "Sir? Mr. Vance?" she managed. "That is right," he said, his voice a low rumble that matched his frame. His eyes took in her appearance, but unlike some others she had encountered, There was no judgment there, only concern. "What can I do for you, miss?" "My name is Rebecca Johnson. The lady at the hotel said you might be looking for a housekeeper. I am a hard worker, sir. I can cook, clean, mend, tend a garden. I do not require much in wages, just room and board, and perhaps a small salary." She hated how desperate she sounded, but there was no point in pretending. Samuel was quiet for a moment, studying her face. Rebecca fought the urge to look away from those penetrating blue eyes. She saw the moment he noticed how thin she was, how her hands trembled slightly despite her best efforts to control them. "When did you last eat?" he asked quietly. The kindness in his voice nearly undid her. "Yesterday morning," she lied. It had actually been longer. His jaw tightened. "I see. Well, Miss Johnson, I do indeed need a housekeeper. The job includes room and board in the main house plus $20 a month. Does that sound acceptable?" $20 was more than generous for such a position, especially with room and board included. Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes. "Yes, sir, that sounds very acceptable. Thank you." "Good. I have a few more supplies to purchase, then we'll head to the ranch. But first, we are going to get some food in you. You look like a strong wind could blow you over." "Sir, I cannot pay." "Did I ask you to pay?" His tone was gentle but firm. "You work for me now, Miss Johnson. I take care of what is mine. That includes making sure my employees do not starve." Rebecca followed Samuel out of the general store and down the street to a small restaurant. She was acutely aware of how out of place she looked, but Samuel did not seem bothered by it. He guided her to a table near the back and ordered enough food for 3 people: steak, potatoes, beans, bread, and coffee. When the food arrived, Rebecca had to force herself to eat slowly. Every instinct screamed at her to devour everything in sight, but she knew that would make her sick. Samuel ate quietly across from her, not pressing her with questions, allowing her the dignity of eating in peace. "How long have you been traveling?" he asked finally, when she had taken the edge off her hunger. "About a year," Rebecca admitted. "I was heading to San Francisco to find my uncle, but I ran out of money some time ago." "That is a hard journey for anyone, let alone a woman traveling alone. You are braver than most." Rebecca shook her head. "Not brave, just stubborn, and lucky, I suppose, to have made it this far." "Lucky and stubborn is a good combination out here," Samuel said, and the corner of his mouth lifted in what might have been a smile. "My ranch is not fancy, Miss Johnson. It is just me and a couple of hired hands who help with the cattle and horses. The house is solid but simple. You will have your own room, and I expect you to keep the place clean, do the cooking, and handle the laundry and mending. In return, you will have steady meals, a safe place to sleep, and your wages. If that arrangement suits you, we have a deal." "It suits me very well, Mr. Vance, thank you." They finished the meal in companionable silence. Rebecca felt more human than she had in months, though she was so tired she could barely keep her eyes open. Samuel noticed and stood, placing some coins on the table. "Let us get my supplies loaded and head home. You look about ready to fall over." The ride to the ranch took about an hour. Rebecca sat in the wagon beside Samuel, fighting to stay awake, as the wagon bounced along the dusty road. The landscape was beautiful in a wild, untamed way. Pine trees covered the hills, and rocky outcroppings jutted from the earth like ancient bones. The late afternoon sun cast everything in gold and amber. "It is beautiful here," Rebecca murmured. "It is," Samuel agreed. "Hard land, but honest. It gives back what you put into it." The ranch came into view as they crested a hill. It was indeed simple but well maintained. The main house was a solid wooden structure with a covered porch. A barn stood nearby, along with a few other outbuildings and a corral where several horses grazed. The whole property was nestled in a small valley with a creek running through it. Samuel helped Rebecca down from the wagon, his hands steadying her when she stumbled slightly. "Easy there. Let me show you to your room, then you can rest. We will worry about everything else tomorrow." The inside of the house was neat, but clearly lacked a woman's touch. The main room served as both kitchen and living space, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. Simple furniture was arranged practically rather than aesthetically. Samuel led her down a short hallway where 3 doors stood. "That is my room," he said, pointing to the door at the end of the hall. "This middle one is storage, and this," he opened the door on the right, "will be yours." Rebecca stepped into the room and felt her throat tighten with emotion. It was small but clean, with a real bed covered in quilts, a simple dresser, a washstand with a basin and pitcher, and a window that looked out over the valley. After a year of sleeping on the ground, it looked like the finest hotel room in San Francisco. "Mr. Vance, Her voice broke. "Samuel," he said quietly. "You can call me Samuel. And you do not need to say anything, Miss Johnson. Just rest." He left, closing the door gently behind him. Rebecca stood in the center of the room for a long moment, afraid that if she blinked, it would all disappear. Then slowly she approached the bed. The quilts were handmade, worn soft from use. She sat on the edge, then lay back, her head sinking into the pillow. She had not slept in a real bed for a year. The thought repeated in her mind as tears slid down her temples into her hair. All the fear, all the exhaustion, all the nights of wondering if she would survive to see another day suddenly caught up with her. She curled on her side, pulled one of the quilts around her, and sobbed quietly until sleep claimed her. When Rebecca woke, the room was dark. For a confused moment she did not know where she was. Then memory returned. She sat up, disoriented. How long had she slept? The house was quiet around her. She found matches on the dresser and lit the oil lamp, then noticed that someone had brought in her pathetic bundle of belongings and set them on the chair. There was also a basin of clean water and a towel. Rebecca washed her face and hands, feeling somewhat more human. Her stomach growled, reminding her that despite the large meal earlier, she had not eaten nearly enough to make up for the past weeks of near starvation. She debated whether to venture out into the house, then decided it was better to face Samuel now and establish the terms of her employment properly. She found him in the main room, sitting at the rough-hewn table with papers spread before him. An oil lamp cast warm light across his face, highlighting the strong lines of his features. He looked up when she entered. "Miss Johnson, how are you feeling?" "Better, thank you, and please call me Rebecca. I apologize for falling asleep like that. I should have started on my duties immediately." Samuel shook his head. "You needed rest. There will be plenty of time for work. Are you hungry?" Now that he mentioned it, she was starving. "A little." He stood and moved to the stove, where a pot sat warming. "I'm not much of a cook, but I can manage stew. It is nothing fancy." "It smells wonderful," Rebecca said honestly. She watched as he ladled stew into a bowl and set it before her with a chunk of bread. She ate more slowly this time, savoring each bite. "I should tell you," Samuel said, settling back into his chair. "The hired hands, Tom and Joe, live in the bunkhouse. They are good men, respectful. They take their breakfast and dinner here at the house, lunch out on the range. They will be expecting breakfast at dawn." Rebecca nodded. "I can do that. What do they usually eat?" "Eggs, bacon, biscuits, coffee, nothing complicated. I have chickens out back for eggs, and I keep the larder stocked with basics. There is a root cellar under the house and a smokehouse behind the barn. I will show you everything tomorrow." "How long has it been since your last housekeeper left?" 3 weeks. I have been managing, but it is not my strong suit." He gestured at the papers before him. "I am better with numbers and cattle than I am with keeping house." Rebecca smiled slightly. "Then we should work well together. I am terrible with numbers, but quite good at keeping house." They talked for a while longer, Rebecca asking questions about the routine of the ranch and what would be expected of her. Samuel answered patiently, and Rebecca found herself relaxing in his presence. There was something solid and dependable about him, a quiet strength that made her feel safe for the first time in a very long while. Finally, Rebecca could not stifle a yawn. Samuel noticed immediately, "You should get more rest. Tomorrow will be a full day." Rebecca stood, picking up her empty bowl to wash it, but Samuel took it from her hands. "I will take care of it. Go sleep." "But—" "Rebecca?" He said her name firmly but kindly. "You have been through hell this past year. Take the rest when it is offered. There will be plenty of work soon enough. She met his eyes, seeing genuine concern there, and nodded. Thank you, Samuel, for everything. I know you did not have to help me like this. Yes, I did, he said simply. Good night, Rebecca. Good night. Rebecca returned to her room and changed into her one nightgown, which was as worn and patched as everything else she owned. She climbed into the bed properly this time, pulling the quilts up to her chin. The mattress was filled with straw and corn husks, nothing fancy, but after a year on the ground, it felt like heaven. She could hear the wind rustling through the pines outside, the distant sound of the creak of the house settling. She was safe. She was warm. She had food and a place to stay. The relief was so intense it was almost painful. Rebecca closed her eyes and let herself sink into sleep, deep and dreamless. The next morning, Rebecca woke before dawn, disoriented again until memory settled. She dressed quickly in her one other dress, which was in slightly better condition than the one she had worn yesterday, and braided her hair. When she emerged into the main room, she found Samuel already awake, stoking the fire in the stove. Morning, he said. Coffee is almost ready. I can make breakfast, Rebecca said immediately. That's my job now. Samuel studied her for a moment, then nodded. All right. I will show you where everything is. He walked her through the kitchen, showing her the larder, the root cellar access, where he kept the dishes and cooking implements. It was all well organized, which surprised her given that he had been managing alone. The chickens had already been fed and eggs collected, which Samuel must have done before dawn. Rebecca set to work making biscuits while bacon sizzled in a cast iron pan. She scrambled eggs with milk and butter, made a pot of coffee strong enough to strip paint, and had everything ready just as two men appeared at the door, knocking politely before entering. Tom, Joe, this is Rebecca Johnson, our new housekeeper, Samuel introduced. Rebecca, this is Tom Fletcher and Joe Martinez. Tom was older, probably in his 50s, with a weathered face and kind eyes. Joe was younger, maybe 30, with dark hair and a ready smile. Both men nodded respectfully and removed their hats. Pleased to meet you, Miss Johnson, Tom said. Sure smells better than anything Samuel has been making. Everyone sat at the table, and Rebecca served the food. She noticed how the men ate with good appetite, but also with manners, not the rough behavior she might have expected. Samuel had chosen his workers well. This is delicious, Miss Johnson, Joe said around a mouthful of biscuit. We have been missing good cooking, something fierce. After breakfast, the men headed out to work on various ranch tasks. Samuel lingered, helping Rebecca clear the table despite her protests. I have to ride into town this afternoon for a few things I forgot yesterday, he said. Do you need anything? Fabric for a new dress, perhaps? Shoes? Rebecca looked down at her worn boots. The offer was tempting, but she had no money. I cannot afford. Consider it an advance on your wages. You cannot work properly if your boots fall apart and you need more than 2 dresses. His tone brooked no argument. Pride warred with necessity. Necessity won. That would be very helpful. Thank you. Samuel nodded. Make a list of anything else you need. We will settle accounts at the end of the month. After he left, Rebecca explored the house more thoroughly. It was clear that it had been built by someone who valued function over form. Everything was solid and well-made but plain. The furniture was handcrafted, probably by Samuel himself. There were no decorations, no curtains on the windows, no rugs on the floor. It was a house, not a home. Rebecca spent the morning cleaning, which mostly consisted of dusting and sweeping since Samuel had been maintaining basic order. She found linens that needed mending and set those aside for later. The larder was well stocked with basics: flour, sugar, salt, dried beans, and such. But there was no sign of preserves or canned goods. She made a mental note to ask Samuel about putting up vegetables, if there was a garden. By midday, she had worked up an appetite again. Her body was craving food after so long with so little. She made herself a simple lunch of bread and cheese, then sat on the porch to eat it, watching the mountains in the distance. This was going to be her life now. The thought was strange. After a year of constant movement and uncertainty, she would be staying in one place, working for Samuel, living in this house. Samuel returned in the late afternoon with packages wrapped in brown paper. He set them on the table and gestured for Rebecca to open them. Inside, she found fabric in practical calico prints, enough for at least 2 dresses. There were also new boots, stockings, a proper bonnet, needles, thread, and buttons. "This is too much," Rebecca protested, even as her fingers traced the sturdy leather of the boots. "It is what you need. Like I said, consider it in advance. You will work it off quick enough." Samuel's tone was matter of fact, not condescending. "I also picked up some extras at the general store. Flour, sugar, coffee. Figured you would need them for cooking." Over the next week, Rebecca settled into a routine. She rose before dawn to make breakfast for the men, spent her mornings cleaning and mending, made lunch for herself and sometimes for Samuel if he was working close to the house, and spent her afternoons cooking dinner and doing laundry or other tasks. In the evenings, she would sew, making herself new dresses from the fabric Samuel had bought. The work was hard, but it was honest and steady. She had enough to eat, a comfortable place to sleep, and no fear of violence or starvation. Compared to the past year, it was paradise. Samuel was an easy man to work for. He was quiet, not given to unnecessary conversation, but he was never unkind. He thanked her for meals, complimented her cooking, and treated her with a respect that some men would not have extended to a housekeeper. Tom and Joe were similarly respectful, and Rebecca found herself actually enjoying the company at mealtimes. But there was something else growing, something Rebecca tried to ignore at first. She found herself looking forward to Samuel's presence. The sound of his boots on the porch would make her heart beat a little faster. She noticed things about him she had no business noticing. The way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he almost smiled, the competent way his hands moved when he was working on something, the low rumble of his voice in the evenings when he would occasionally read aloud from a newspaper or book. She told herself it was just gratitude. He had saved her, given her a job and a home when she had nothing. Of course she felt warmly toward him. It did not mean anything more than that. One evening, about 2 weeks after Rebecca had arrived, she was in the kitchen washing dishes from dinner when she heard an odd sound from Samuel's room. A thud, followed by what might have been a curse. She dried her hands and walked down the hall, knocking gently on his door. "Samuel, are you all right?" "Fine," came his voice, but it sounded strained. Rebecca hesitated, then opened the door a crack. Samuel was sitting on the floor beside his bed, his face pale. The bed itself was stripped of linens and pushed askew. "What happened?" Rebecca asked, stepping into the room. "Damn bed frame broke," Samuel said, pushing himself to his feet with obvious effort. "One of the support boards cracked. Must have been weak wood. I will fix it tomorrow." Rebecca looked at the broken bed, then at Samuel. "Where will you sleep tonight?" He shrugged. "Floor is fine, would not be the first time." Something about the casual way he said it made Rebecca's chest tighten. Here he was, having given her a comfortable bed when she desperately needed it, and now he was planning to sleep on the hard floor without complaint. "Take my bed," she said immediately. "I will sleep out here on the—" "Absolutely not." Samuel's voice was firm. "You are paying guest under my roof. I will manage just fine." "I am not a guest, I am your employee, and after sleeping on the ground for a year, I assure you a floor with a blanket is luxury." When he started to protest, she held up a hand. "Samuel, please. You gave me a safe place to sleep when I had nothing. Let me do this small thing in return." They argued for several minutes, both stubborn, until finally Samuel agreed to a compromise. He would sleep on the floor of his own room where he could keep his personal belongings, and Rebecca would provide extra blankets and pillows to make it more comfortable. Rebecca gathered the softest blankets she could find and made up a bedroll on the floor of Samuel's room. It was strange being in his personal space. The room was Spartan like the rest of the house, but there were a few personal touches. A photograph of an older couple on the dresser who must have been his parents, a worn Bible, a few books. "That should be adequate," she said, stepping back to examine her work. "Promise me you will tell me if you need anything else." I promise. Thank you, Rebecca." She left him there and returned to her own room, but sleep was long in coming. She kept thinking about Samuel sleeping on the floor while she had a bed. It did not seem right, even though logically she knew he was a grown man who could handle minor discomfort. The next day, Samuel spent his spare hours working on fixing the bed frame. Rebecca watched him from the kitchen window, seeing how his muscles moved under his shirt as he planed new boards and fitted them into place. She forced herself to look away and focus on kneading bread dough. That evening, Tom mentioned that there would be a dance in town the following Saturday. "Whole town turns out," he said. "Good food, good music. You should come, Miss Johnson. Be nice for you to meet folks." Rebecca hesitated. She had not been to a social event in over a year, and the thought of being around so many people was daunting. But she also knew she could not hide on the ranch forever. "I think that sounds lovely," she said. "Thank you for telling me." She noticed Samuel glance at her, something unreadable in his expression. The week passed quickly. Samuel worked on his bed frame in the evenings, and by Thursday it was repaired and reassembled. But when Rebecca mentioned it that night after dinner, he waved her off. "It is fixed, but I want to make sure it is solid before I trust it with my weight. Give it another day or two." Rebecca suspected he was being overly cautious, but she did not argue. Saturday arrived with clear skies and warm sunshine. Rebecca dressed in one of her new dresses, a simple calico in deep blue that made her eyes look brighter. She'd filled out a bit in the past weeks thanks to regular meals, and the dress fit her properly now, showing a figure that was naturally curved and feminine. She braided her hair and pinned it up, then examined herself in the small mirror above the dresser. She looked healthy again. The hollowness had left her cheeks, and her skin had lost that grayish cast of near starvation. She was still too thin, perhaps, but she was getting there. Samuel was waiting in the main room when she emerged. He had changed into clean clothes and shaved, and Rebecca caught herself staring before she could stop herself. He was a handsome man, there was no denying it. The kind of handsome that was all strength and capability rather than delicate features. "You look nice," he said. And was that a hint of color on his cheeks? "Thank you. So do you." The ride into Murphy's was pleasant. Tom and Joe rode alongside the wagon, all of them in good spirits. When they arrived, the center of town had been transformed. Lanterns hung from posts, tables laden with food stretched along one side of the street, and a platform had been erected for the musicians. People were already gathering, dressed in their best clothes. Rebecca felt a flutter of nervousness as Samuel helped her down from the wagon. She did not know anyone here except for the three men from the ranch. "Stay close," Samuel said quietly, as if sensing her discomfort. "I will introduce you around." He was true to his word. Over the next hour, Rebecca met what felt like half the town. There was the doctor and his wife, the school teacher, several shop owners, and many ranching families. Everyone was friendly, curious about the new housekeeper at the Vance Ranch, but not intrusive. When the music started, couples moved onto the makeshift dance floor. Rebecca watched, tapping her foot to the lively fiddle music. She had always enjoyed dancing, back when her life had allowed for such pleasures. "Would you like to dance?" Samuel's voice came from beside her. Rebecca looked up at him, surprised. Yes, I would." He led her onto the dance floor as the band struck up a reel. Samuel was a competent dancer, not flashy but steady, and Rebecca found herself laughing as they moved through the steps. It felt wonderful to do something purely for enjoyment, to feel the music and the movement and the warmth of Samuel's hand on her waist. They danced several dances, and Rebecca's cheeks flushed with exertion and happiness. Between dances, Samuel fetched them both cups of punch, and they stood on the sidelines watching the other dancers. "Thank you for bringing me," Rebecca said. "I had forgotten what it felt like to be part of a community." "You're part of one now," Samuel said. "Whether you like it or not, Murphy's has claimed you." Rebecca smiled. The thought did not displease her at all. As the evening wore on, several other men asked Rebecca to dance, and she accepted politely. But she found herself looking for Samuel between dances, disappointed when she did not see him. Finally, she spotted him talking with a group of ranchers, and something eased in her chest. Late in the evening, the band played a slower song, and Samuel appeared at her side again. "One more?" he asked. This dance was different. There was no energetic movement, just a gentle swaying close enough that Rebecca could feel the warmth of Samuel's body, smell the clean scent of soap on his skin. His hand on her waist seemed to burn through the fabric of her dress. "Rebecca," he said quietly, and something in his voice made her look up at him. His blue eyes were intense, searching her face. "I want you to know that you are safe with me. I hope you know that." "I do," she said softly. "I have never doubted it." "Good. That is good." They finished the dance in silence, but it was a comfortable silence, full of unspoken things that neither was quite ready to voice. The ride home was quieter than the ride into town. Tom and Joe were singing off-key behind the wagon, slightly drunk on whiskey but harmless. Rebecca sat beside Samuel, acutely aware of every place their bodies touched as the wagon bounced along the rough road. When they arrived at the ranch, Tom and Joe stumbled off to the bunkhouse, still singing. Samuel helped Rebecca down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist for just a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you for tonight," Rebecca said. "I had a wonderful time." "So did I." Samuel's voice was low, intimate in the darkness. "Rebecca, But whatever he was going to say was interrupted by a crash from the barn, followed by an alarmed whinny. Samuel's head snapped toward the sound. "Stay here," he ordered, already moving toward the barn. Rebecca, of course, did not stay. She followed at a distance close enough to see Samuel enter the barn, heard him curse. She hurried forward and found him kneeling beside one of the horses, a beautiful bay mare who was lying on her side in the stall, clearly in distress. "What is wrong?" Rebecca asked. "She is foaling. I knew she was close, but I did not think it would be tonight." Samuel's hands moved over the mare's distended belly, his face creased with concern. "Something is wrong. The foal is not positioned right." "What can I do?" "Get me clean cloths, warm water, and the lantern from the tack room. Hurry." Rebecca ran. By the time she returned, Samuel had removed his vest and rolled up his sleeves. He was murmuring to the mare in a low, soothing voice. For the next 2 hours, Rebecca assisted as Samuel worked to turn the foal into the proper position for birth. It was hard, messy work, and the mare was suffering despite Samuel's best efforts to be gentle. Rebecca held the lantern steady, brought fresh water, and did whatever Samuel asked without question. Finally, with a rush of fluid and a final push from the exhausted mare, the foal slipped into the world. Samuel cleared the membrane from its face and rubbed it vigorously with a cloth. For a terrible moment, the foal did not move, and Rebecca thought they had lost it. Then it shuddered and took a gasping breath. "There you go," Samuel murmured, continuing to rub the foal dry. "That is it, little one. Breathe." The mare, exhausted but alert, lifted her head to nose at her baby. It was a filly, all long legs and big eyes with a white star on her forehead. Rebecca realized she was crying. The relief and joy of seeing new life enter the world after all that struggle was overwhelming. Samuel looked up at her and smiled, a real smile that transformed his usually serious face. "We did it," he said. "You did it," Rebecca corrected. "I just held the light." "You did more than that. Most women would have fainted or run away. You stayed and helped." They stayed in the barn until the filly was standing, albeit shakily, and nursing. The mare seemed recovered, tired but content. Samuel banked the lantern and they walked back to the house through the pre-dawn darkness. Both of them were filthy, covered in barn mess and sweat. At the porch, Samuel stopped and looked down at himself ruefully. "I should wash up outside. Do not want to track this through the house." Rebecca nodded, suddenly aware of how tired she was. The combination of the dance and the foaling had exhausted her. "I will heat some water for you." "You go rest. I can manage." But Rebecca was already moving toward the house. She stoked up the fire and put water on to heat, then gathered clean cloths. By the time Samuel came inside, having stripped off his ruined shirt outside, she had a basin of warm water ready. He paused when he saw her, and Rebecca became intensely aware that he was standing there shirtless. She had seen men without shirts before, but somehow this felt different. She could see the muscles of his chest and abdomen, the scars that spoke of a hard life, the way his skin gleamed in the lamplight. "Thank you," he said quietly. Rebecca nodded, not trusting her voice, and retreated to her room. She cleaned herself up as best she could with the cold water in her basin, changed into her nightgown, and collapsed onto the bed. Sleep came quickly, but her dreams were full of blue eyes and gentle hands and a voice calling her name. The next few weeks passed in a blur of work and growing awareness. Rebecca could no longer deny to herself that she had feelings for Samuel that went well beyond gratitude or mere attraction. She was falling in love with him, perhaps had already fallen, and she had no idea what to do about it. The problem was that she could not tell if Samuel felt the same way. He was unfailingly kind and respectful, but he was that way with everyone. Sometimes she would catch him looking at her with an expression she could not read, but then he would turn away, and the moment would pass. Rebecca tried to focus on her work, but it was difficult when her heart jumped every time Samuel entered a room. She found herself making his favorite foods, mending his clothes with extra care, looking for any excuse to be near him. One afternoon, while Samuel was working on fixing a fence close to the house, Rebecca brought him water and some fresh bread with butter. He thanked her and sat in the shade to eat, and Rebecca found herself sitting beside him rather than returning immediately to the house. "The garden is coming along well," she said, just to fill the silence. She had planted vegetables in the small plot behind the house, and they were beginning to sprout. "You have a gift for growing things," Samuel said. "Everything you touch seems to thrive." Rebecca felt heat rise in her cheeks. "It just takes patience and care." "Exactly." Samuel was looking at her now, his blue eyes intense. "Patience and care. That is what you bring to everything. This house, the garden, the animals, even difficult men like me." "You are not difficult," Rebecca protested. "I am not easy either." He was quiet for a moment. "Rebecca, I need to tell you something." Her heart began to pound. "What is it?" But before Samuel could speak, Tom came riding up fast, his horse lathered. "Boss, we have got trouble. Some of the cattle are missing. Looks like they were driven off deliberately. Joe is tracking them now, but he needs help." Samuel was on his feet instantly. "How many?" "At least 20 head. Could be rustlers." Samuel cursed under his breath. "All right, I am coming." He turned to Rebecca. "Stay at the house. Keep the doors locked. I will be back as soon as I can." "Be careful," Rebecca said, fear clutching at her heart. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded and strode toward the barn to saddle his horse. Within minutes, both men were riding off at a gallop, leaving Rebecca alone. She returned to the house, her mind racing. Cattle rustling was a serious crime in these parts, one that could turn violent quickly. She tried to focus on her chores, but every sound made her jump, every shadow made her nervous. The afternoon dragged into evening. Rebecca made dinner but had no appetite. She kept the rifle Samuel had shown her hanging by the door loaded and ready, though she hoped she would not need it. Night fell. Still no sign of Samuel or the others. Rebecca lit lamps in the windows, both to help them find their way home and to dispel some of the darkness. She tried to read but could not focus on the words. Finally, she just sat in the rocking chair, staring at the door and praying. It was nearly midnight when she heard horses approaching. Rebecca grabbed the rifle and positioned herself away from the windows, just as Samuel had taught her. "Rebecca, it is me," Samuel's voice called from outside. "Do not shoot." Relief flooded through her so intensely she almost fell. She set the rifle aside and threw open the door. Samuel stood on the porch, looking exhausted and dirty, but unharmed. Tom and Joe were with him, equally worn. "Did you find them?" Rebecca asked. "We found them. And the rustlers. Turn them over to the sheriff in town. The cattle are back where they belong." Samuel's voice was rough with fatigue. Rebecca immediately shifted into caretaker mode. "You all need food and rest. Come in, sit down. I will heat up dinner." The men were too tired to argue. They sat at the table while Rebecca bustled around heating stew and making fresh coffee. They ate in near silence, exhaustion evident in every line of their bodies. After Tom and Joe had stumbled off to the bunkhouse, Samuel remained at the table. Rebecca cleaned up around him, noting how his eyes were starting to droop. "You should sleep," she said gently. "In a minute." He looked up at her. "I was worried about you alone here all day." "I was more worried about you. Rustlers are dangerous. So are many things in this world. But we cannot let fear stop us from doing what needs to be done." Rebecca sat down across from him. "What were you going to tell me this afternoon before Tom came?" Samuel was quiet for so long that Rebecca thought he might not answer. Then he said, "It can wait. I am too tired to say it properly." Disappointment stabbed through her, but she nodded. "All right, but Samuel, whatever it is, you can tell me. I hope you know that." "I do." He stood, swaying slightly with fatigue. "Good night, Rebecca." "Good night." Rebecca lay awake in her bed, thinking about the fear she had felt when Samuel rode off to face potential danger, the relief when he returned safely, the way her heart seemed to have transferred its allegiance completely to this quiet, strong man who had given her so much. She was in love with him. Completely, irrevocably in love, and she had no idea if he would ever love her back. The next morning, Samuel slept later than usual. Rebecca made breakfast for Tom and Joe, but kept a plate warm for Samuel. When he finally emerged, looking more rested but still tired, she set the food before him without comment. "Thank you," he said, and his hand brushed hers as she set down his coffee cup. The touch sent electricity through her. After breakfast, Samuel announced he needed to ride into town to file a proper report with the sheriff about the rustling incident. "Would you like to come along?" he asked Rebecca. "You mentioned last week that you needed thread and some other things from the general store." Rebecca agreed immediately. The ride into town was pleasant, the morning air still cool before the heat of the day set in. They talked easily about small things, the ranch, the garden, town gossip that Samuel had picked up. But underneath the casual conversation, Rebecca could feel a tension, as if something unspoken was building between them. In town, Samuel went to the sheriff's office while Rebecca headed to the general store. She was examining spools of thread when a woman's voice behind her said, "You must be Rebecca Johnson." Rebecca turned to find a handsome woman in her early 30s with blonde hair and a fashionable dress. "Yes, I am. Have we met?" "Not formally. I am Claire Winters. My family has the ranch adjacent to Samuel Vance's property." The woman's smile was friendly, but her eyes were assessing. "I heard Samuel had hired a new housekeeper." "That is right. I've been working for him for about a month now." "And how are you finding it? Samuel can be rather particular." There was something in the woman's tone that Rebecca did not quite like. "He is an excellent employer, fair and kind." "Oh yes, Samuel is definitely kind." Claire moved closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "I should warn you, half the unmarried women in the county have set their caps for him. He is quite the catch, you know. Good land, prosperous ranch, and handsome to boot. Not to mention lonely, since his parents passed a few years ago." Rebecca felt a knot form in her stomach. "I'm sure Mr. Vance is capable of managing his own romantic interests." "Of course. I just thought you should know, in case you were developing any expectations, a man like Samuel will eventually marry someone of his own station. It is just the way of things." The implication was clear and stung like a slap. Rebecca was a housekeeper, someone of low social standing, and she should not presume to think of Samuel as anything more than an employer. "Thank you for the advice," Rebecca said coolly. "If you will excuse me, I need to finish my shopping." She turned away before Claire could respond, her hands shaking as she selected the thread she needed. The woman's words had struck at her deepest insecurity. Of course Samuel would not want her. He had rescued her from destitution, given her a job out of kindness. That did not mean he saw her as an equal, let alone as a potential wife. Samuel was waiting by the wagon when she emerged from the store. He took one look at her face and frowned. "What is wrong?" "Nothing. I am fine." "Rebecca." He stepped closer, his voice low. "You are a terrible liar. What happened?" She could not tell him about Claire. It would be too humiliating. "I just have a headache. The heat, perhaps." He did not look convinced, but did not press. The ride home was quieter than the ride into town, and Rebecca stared at the passing scenery without really seeing it. Over the next few days, Rebecca tried to rebuild the walls around her heart. She had been foolish to let herself hope for more than what she had. She focused on her work, keeping her interactions with Samuel polite but distant. Samuel noticed the change. She could see it in the way he watched her, concern and confusion on his face. But he did not push, and Rebecca was grateful for that. A week after the encounter with Claire, Rebecca was working in the garden when she heard the sound of a rider approaching. She looked up to see a strange man on horseback, rough-looking with cold eyes. He dismounted and started walking toward the house. "Can I help you?" Rebecca called, standing and brushing dirt from her skirt. The man looked her over in a way that made her skin crawl. "Looking for Vance. He around?" "He is out on the range. He will be back this evening. You can leave a message with me if you like." "I will wait." The man started to sit on the porch steps. "I would prefer if you waited in the barn," Rebecca said firmly. "Mr. Vance does not like strangers in the house when he is not here." The man's expression darkened. "Now that is not very friendly, is it? Here I rode all this way and you are telling me I cannot even sit on the porch? Those are the rules. I am sure Mr. Vance will be happy to speak with you in the barn." The man stood and walked toward her, and Rebecca's hand moved toward the knife she kept in her apron pocket for cutting vegetables. But before the man could get too close, a voice called out, "That is far enough." Samuel was standing near the barn, and Rebecca had never been so happy to see anyone in her life. He must have returned from the range without her hearing. His hand rested on the gun at his hip, and his expression was cold. The stranger stopped. "Vance, did not expect you back so soon. Clearly, what do you want?" "Just came to deliver a message from the boys. They think you should reconsider your testimony about the rustling. Might be healthier for everyone involved." "You can tell the boys that my testimony stands, and you can also tell them that if I see any of them on my property again, I will shoot first and ask questions later. Now get off my land." The stranger hesitated, then seemed to think better of challenging Samuel. He mounted his horse and rode off, though not before giving Rebecca one last unpleasant look. Samuel waited until the man was out of sight before hurrying over to Rebecca. "Are you all right? Did he hurt you?" "No, I'm fine, just frightened." She was shaking now that the danger had passed. Samuel pulled her against his chest, his arms wrapping around her protectively. "I am sorry. I should not have left you alone. I did not think they would be stupid enough to come here." Rebecca let herself lean into his warmth for just a moment before pulling back. "I handled it. I was not going to let him in the house." "You did exactly right." Samuel's hands framed her face, tilting it up so he could look into her eyes. "Rebecca, if anything had happened to you, He did not finish the sentence, but the anguish in his eyes spoke volumes. Before Rebecca could think better of it, before she could remember all the reasons why this was a bad idea, she rose on her toes and kissed him. For a heartbeat, Samuel froze. Then his arms tightened around her and he was kissing her back, deeply, desperately, as if he had been holding back for far too long. Rebecca wound her arms around his neck, pressing closer, feeling like she had finally come home. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that since the day you walked into that general store looking like a strong wind would blow you over, but with more courage in your eyes than anyone I had ever met." "Really?" Rebecca's voice was barely a whisper. "Really, Rebecca, I have been going half mad trying to figure out how to tell you. You are not just my housekeeper. You have not been for a long time. He took a breath. "I love you. I am in love with you." And I know that might not be what you want to hear. And if you just see me as an employer, I will understand. But I needed you to know. Joy burst through Rebecca like sunrise. Samuel, I love you too. I have been so afraid that you did not feel the same way, that I was just being foolish. You are not foolish. You are brave and strong and beautiful, and I do not deserve you. But if you will have me, I promise to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you. Rebecca laughed, tears streaming down her face. You saved my life. You gave me everything when I had nothing. You are the best man I have ever known. He kissed her again, slower this time, savoring it. When they finally broke apart, both of them were smiling. I have to warn you, Samuel said, I am not romantic. I am not good with words or grand gestures. I am just a rancher who works hard and goes to bed tired every night. That sounds perfect to me. Rebecca took his hand, threading her fingers through his. Samuel, when you gave me your bed and slept on the floor, even when your own bed was broken and you could have taken mine, I knew you were special. You put my needs above your own without a second thought. That is the kind of man you are. I could not sleep in comfort knowing you were on the floor, not after what you had been through. And that is exactly what I mean. Rebecca squeezed his hand. So what happens now? Now I court you properly. I take you on walks and rides, bring you flowers, ask your uncle for permission to marry you if I can find him in San Francisco. Rebecca blinked. You want to marry me? Eventually, if you will have me. I am not asking right now. I know it is too soon. But I want you to know my intentions are honorable. I want to marry you, Rebecca Johnson. I want you as my wife, not my housekeeper. Then yes, Rebecca said simply. Yes to courtship. Yes to marriage. Yes to all of it. I do not need a long engagement. I know my own heart. Samuel lifted her hand to his lips. Let me do this right. Give me a few months to court you properly. I want everyone to know that I love you, that this is not some arrangement of convenience. Over the following weeks, Samuel was true to his word. He courted Rebecca with a quiet intensity that left her breathless. There were wildflowers left on the kitchen table in the morning, rides into the hills to watch the sunset, stolen kisses in the barn when Tom and Joe were not looking. He held her hand at church on Sundays, making their relationship clear to the whole town. Some people talked, of course. Claire Winters looked like she had been sucking lemons whenever she saw them together. But most of the town seemed genuinely happy for them. Rebecca made friends among the ranching wives and townswomen, finding herself welcomed into the community. 3 months after that first kiss, Samuel proposed properly. He took Rebecca on a ride to a beautiful meadow high in the hills, spread a blanket, and knelt before her with a simple gold band. Rebecca Johnson, you are the light of my life. Will you marry me? Yes, Rebecca said, not even trying to stop her tears. Yes, 1,000 times yes. They were married a month later in the small church in Murphy's. Tom and Joe stood up with Samuel, while 2 of Rebecca's new friends from town attended her. The whole town turned out for the celebration afterward with food and music and dancing. That night, Rebecca stood in the bedroom that was now theirs together, looking at the bed that had meant so much to her that first night. Samuel came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. What are you thinking about, Itibit Singh? He asked. About how far I have come. 1.5 years ago, I was sleeping on the ground, starving and alone. And now I am here, married to the man I love, with a home and a future. I am the lucky one, Samuel said, turning her to face him. You brought life to this place. You made a house into a home. We made a home, Rebecca corrected, together. Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. The ranch demanded hard work, and there were difficulties with weather and cattle, and the normal struggles of running a business. But they faced everything together, their love deepening with each passing month. Rebecca found she had a gift for the ranch beyond just housekeeping. She started keeping the books, organizing supplies more efficiently, and even helping with the horses when needed. Samuel treated her as a true partner, valuing her opinions and including her in decisions. A year after their wedding, Rebecca discovered she was pregnant. Samuel was over the moon, already building a cradle in his workshop and treating Rebecca like she was made of spun glass. "I am not fragile," Rebecca protested when he tried to take a basket of laundry from her hands. "I know, but let me take care of you anyway." Their first child, a son, was born on a snowy January morning in 1875. They named him James, after Samuel's father. Samuel cried when he held his son for the first time, and Rebecca fell even more in love with her husband seeing the tenderness with which he cradled the tiny infant. 2 years later, a daughter arrived, whom they named Sarah after Rebecca's mother. And 3 years after that, another son, Thomas, named for Tom Fletcher, who had become like family to them. The ranch prospered. Samuel expanded the herd, and Rebecca started a business selling her preserves and baked goods in town. Tom retired but stayed on in the bunkhouse, becoming a beloved grandfather figure to the children. Joe eventually married a girl from town and built a house on the property, staying on as Samuel's partner in the ranching operation. Through it all, Samuel and Rebecca's love remained the foundation of everything. They still stole kisses in the barn, still held hands on evening walks, still looked at each other with the wonder of people who could not quite believe their good fortune. One evening, 15 years after Rebecca had first stumbled into Murphy's, she sat on the porch watching the sunset while Samuel finished his chores. The house behind her was full of noise and life, their 3 children arguing good-naturedly over a game. The ranch was thriving, the valley was peaceful, and Rebecca's heart was full. Samuel joined her on the porch, sitting in the rocking chair beside hers and taking her hand. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn gold and pink and purple. "Do you ever think about that first night?" Rebecca asked softly. "When you gave me your bed?" "I think about it often," Samuel admitted. "I think about how different my life would be if you had not walked into that general store, if I had not hired you. I think about what would have happened to me if you had not. I was at the end of my rope, Samuel. You saved my life." "You saved mine, too. I just did not know I needed saving until you arrived." He lifted her hand to his lips. "I was so lonely before you, Rebecca. I had the ranch and my work, but I did not have a home. Not really. You gave me that." Rebecca leaned over and kissed him softly. "We gave each other everything." As the sun set over the California hills, painting the sky in brilliant colors, Rebecca reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From sleeping on the hard ground for a year, desperate and alone, to this moment of perfect contentment. From having nothing to having everything that mattered. It had started with a simple act of kindness, a cowboy giving up his bed for a stranger in need, but that kindness had been the seed from which everything else grew. Love, family, home, belonging, all the things that made life worth living. Rebecca squeezed Samuel's hand, feeling the calluses earned from hard work, the strength that had never failed her. She thought about their children inside, healthy and happy, about the life they had built together from nothing but determination and love. The future stretched ahead of them, full of promise. More years together, watching their children grow, welcoming grandchildren someday, growing old together on this land they both loved. It was everything Rebecca had never dared to dream of during those dark nights sleeping on the ground. And it all came back to that first moment when Samuel Vance had looked at her with compassion instead of judgment, and said she could call him by his first name. Some people might say it was fate. Others might call it luck. But Rebecca knew it was something simpler and more profound. It was love recognizing love, even when disguised as a desperate woman asking for work and a lonely cowboy offering kindness. As the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared, Samuel stood and pulled Rebecca to her feet. "Come on, let us get inside. It is getting cold out here." They walked into their home together, hand in hand, ready for whatever tomorrow might bring, because they had each other, and that was everything. The years continued to be kind to the Vance family. James grew into a strong young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did, though he had his mother's compassionate heart. Sarah inherited Rebecca's gift for growing things and turned the garden into something truly spectacular, eventually starting her own business selling flowers in town. Young Thomas was the wild one, always climbing trees and chasing adventure, but he had his father's steady core beneath the mischief. Samuel and Rebecca watched their children grow with pride and joy. They faced the normal trials of parenthood: childhood illnesses that terrified them, adolescent rebellion that tested their patience, and the bittersweet moment when James left to spend a year learning new ranching techniques from a larger operation in Wyoming. But through it all, their love remained constant. They still made time for each other, still stole moments alone when they could. Samuel would sometimes bring Rebecca wildflowers for no reason at all, and Rebecca would bake his favorite pie just because she knew he had a hard day. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Samuel took Rebecca back to that meadow where he had proposed. The children were old enough now to manage on their own for an afternoon, staying with Joe and his wife. They spread a blanket just as they had all those years ago, and Samuel pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. "You did not need to get me anything," Rebecca protested. "Open it." Inside was a beautifully tooled leather journal and a fine pen. Rebecca looked at Samuel questioningly. "I know you have been wanting to write down your story," he said, "and for the children, so they know where they came from. I thought this might help." Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes. She had mentioned wanting to document their history only once months ago, and Samuel had remembered. "It is perfect. Thank you." "Thank you," Samuel said, taking her hands in his, "for 20 years of making every day better than the last, for giving me a family and a home, for being my partner in everything." "It has been my joy," Rebecca said honestly, "every single day." They lay on the blanket watching clouds drift across the blue sky, talking about everything and nothing, about the children and the ranch, about memories and dreams for the future. "Do you ever miss your uncle?" Samuel asked. "You know, we never did track him down in San Francisco." Rebecca considered the question. They had tried, in the early years of their marriage, to find her uncle. But San Francisco was a big city, and her information had been old. Eventually, they had given up the search. "Sometimes I wonder about him," she admitted. "But Samuel, I found a better family than I ever could have imagined. You, the children, Tom and Joe, all our friends in town. I have everything I need right here." As they rode back to the ranch that evening, Rebecca reflected on how different her life had turned out from what she had planned. She had thought she was heading to San Francisco to start over with her uncle's help. Instead, she had found her true home in the Sierra Nevada foothills, with a man who had shown her what real love looked like. The ranch continued to prosper. Samuel and Joe expanded operations, buying more land and increasing the herd. Rebecca's preserves became famous throughout the region, with people coming from neighboring towns to buy her strawberry jam and pickled vegetables. She hired 2 young women from town to help with the work, giving them the same kind of chance Samuel had once given her. James eventually returned from Wyoming with new knowledge and a wife, a kind young woman named Margaret who fit into the family perfectly. They built a house on the property and started their own family, giving Samuel and Rebecca their first grandchildren, twin boys who had their grandfather's blue eyes and their grandmother's stubborn chin. Sarah fell in love with the new school teacher, a gentle man who appreciated her intelligence and creativity. Their wedding was the event of the season in Murphy's, with flowers from Sarah's garden decorating everything. Thomas, true to his adventurous nature, went to work for the railroad for a few years. But eventually he came home, admitting that no adventure could compare to the life his parents had built. He married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property, and together they started breeding horses, a new venture that added to the family's success. As Rebecca and Samuel moved into their 50s, they began to slow down a bit. James took over more of the daily operations of the ranch, while Rebecca trained her daughters-in-law in the preserves business. But they were far from retired, still active and engaged with their growing family. One evening, after a big family dinner celebrating Thomas's first son's birth, Rebecca and Samuel found themselves alone on the porch again. It had become their ritual, these quiet moments watching the sun set over the land they loved. 9 grandchildren, Samuel marveled. Can you believe it? I can barely keep track of them all, Rebecca laughed, but I love every minute of it. You are a wonderful grandmother, just like you were a wonderful mother. Rebecca leaned her head on Samuel's shoulder. They were both graying now, lines etched on their faces by years of sun and laughter and life. But when Samuel looked at Rebecca, he still saw the courageous young woman who had stumbled into Murphy's all those years ago. And when Rebecca looked at Samuel, she still saw the kind cowboy who had given her not just a bed, but a whole new life. I wrote something today, Rebecca said. In the journal you gave me, want to hear it? Always? Rebecca pulled out the journal, now well worn from use. She had been filling it with their story, but also with reflections and thoughts she wanted to pass on to their descendants. Today I watched our grandchildren playing in the yard, she read, and I thought about how close I came to never having any of this. There was a time when I had given up hope, when I thought I would die alone on some dusty road with no one to even know my name. But then I met a man who showed me that kindness still existed in the world. He gave me a bed when he could have kept it for himself. He gave me a job when others turned me away. And eventually he gave me his heart, which was the greatest gift of all. This life we have built together, this family, this home, it all started with a simple act of compassion. And it taught me something I want all of you to remember. We never know when a small kindness might change someone's entire world. Be that kindness for someone else. Give them the bed when they need it most, even if it means you sleep on the floor. Because love is built on sacrifice, and the best things in life are worth any discomfort. Rebecca's voice had grown thick with emotion by the end. Samuel pulled her close, and she felt his chest shake with silent tears. That is beautiful, he managed finally. But Rebecca, you gave me just as much. You took a house and made it a home. You took a lonely man and gave him a reason to smile every day. Whatever I gave you, you repaid 1,000 times over. Then we are even, Rebecca said, smiling through her own tears. Partners in everything, just like always. They sat there as darkness fell, wrapped in each other's arms, surrounded by the sounds of their family settling down for the night in the various houses now dotting their property. The ranch that had been so quiet when Rebecca first arrived was now full of life and love and laughter. Years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and sorrows. They lost Tom to old age, mourning the man who had become a beloved part of their family. But they also gained more grandchildren, and eventually great-grandchildren, each new life a continuation of the love story that had started so simply. On their 40th wedding anniversary, Samuel and Rebecca renewed their vows in front of their entire family. James's twins were now grown men with families of their own. Sarah's 3 daughters were all married with children of their own. Thomas's brood had expanded to 5 children, all of them showing his adventurous spirit. As Rebecca stood before Samuel, her hand in his, she marveled at the journey they had taken together. From that first desperate day in Murphy's to this moment, surrounded by love and family. 40 years ago, Samuel said, his voice still strong despite his age, I gave you a bed. You gave me a home. I think I got the better end of that bargain. We both did, Rebecca said softly. We both did. They kissed to the sound of applause and cheering from their descendants, 4 generations bearing witness to a love that had started with compassion and grew into something legendary within the family. As they celebrated late into the evening, Rebecca found a quiet moment to stand at the edge of the gathering, just watching. Her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all healthy and happy, all knowing they were loved. The ranch thriving, passing now into the hands of the 4th generation, a legacy of hard work and kindness and love. Samuel came to stand beside her, taking her hand as naturally as breathing. What are you thinking about? Everything, Rebecca said. The first time I saw this place, I thought it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, and it has only gotten more beautiful with time. That is because you are looking at it with me, Samuel said. Everything is more beautiful with you. They stood hand in hand, watching their family celebrate, knowing that their story would live on in the hearts and memories of generations to come. A story about a woman who had nothing and a man who gave her everything. About sleeping on floors and sleeping in each other's arms. About finding home in the most unexpected places. It was a love story for the ages, set against the wild beauty of the California foothills in the waning days of the Old West. A story that proved that the simplest acts of kindness can have the most profound consequences. And as the stars came out over the ranch that night, Rebecca squeezed Samuel's hand and whispered, "Thank you for everything." "No," Samuel said, pulling her close for one more kiss. "Thank you for making my life worth living." The party continued around them, but for that moment it was just the two of them, just like it had always been. Two souls who had found each other when they both needed it most. Two hearts that had recognized home in each other. And somewhere in the house, on a shelf in the study, sat Rebecca's journal. Page after page of their story, written in her careful hand, preserved for future generations. A testament to love and kindness and the simple act of giving someone a safe place to sleep when they needed it most. The story of how a cowboy gave up his bed and slept on the floor, and how that act of compassion changed two lives forever. It was a story with a happy ending, the kind that reminds us that love is real and kindness matters, and sometimes the smallest gestures create the biggest miracles. And Rebecca and Samuel Vance lived out their days on that ranch in Murphy's, California, surrounded by family and love, their hearts full and their lives complete. They had taken nothing and built everything. They had given each other the world. And every night as they climbed into their bed together, Rebecca would remember that first night when Samuel had insisted she take his room while he slept on the floor. The night that had changed everything. The night that had brought her home.